What if I told you that every time you've been hurt, betrayed, disappointed, or devastated, it wasn't actually what happened to you that caused your pain? What if the real source of your suffering has been something entirely different? Something you've had complete control over this entire time, but nobody ever taught you how to use it. 2,000 years ago in the dungeons of Rome, a slave named Epictetus discovered something that would change everything we know about human suffering. This man, who had every reason to be bitter, angry, and broken by life, instead became one of the most powerful and influential philosophers in human history. His discovery was so profound that it spread across empires, influenced kings and emperors, and has been quietly used by the most successful and resilient people throughout history. This ancient secret isn't just philosophy. Modern neuroscience has proven that what Epictetus discovered is literally how your brain works. The most emotionally resilient people on Earth, from Navy SEALs to top CEOs to Olympic athletes, unknowingly use this exact principle every single day. And today, you're going to learn how to master it completely. By the end of this audiobook, you will never experience emotional pain the same way again. Not because you'll become cold or heartless, but because you'll finally understand the difference between what actually hurts you and what you've been taught to believe hurts you. You're about to discover the most powerful psychological defense system ever created. One that has been hiding in plain sight for over 2 millennia. The ancient trick to never get hurt again isn't about avoiding pain. It's about becoming completely immune to the kind of suffering that destroys most people's lives. Are you ready to learn what the strongest minds in history have always known? Chapter 1. The Great Deception. Why everything you think you know about pain is wrong. For your entire life, you have been living under a massive deception. A lie so fundamental, so deeply embedded in how you think about the world that you've never even questioned it. This lie has caused you more suffering than every actual bad thing that has ever happened to you combined. And the worst part, you've been the one telling yourself this lie over and over again, every single day. The lie is this: that other people, circumstances, and events have the power to hurt you. That when someone betrays you, they are the source of your pain. That when you don't get the job, the rejection is what devastates you. That when someone you love leaves, their departure is what breaks your heart. This seems so obvious, so self-evident that questioning it feels absurd. Of course, these things hurt you. Of course, external events cause your suffering. Everyone knows this. But here's the truth that will shatter everything you think you know about emotional pain. Nothing and no one outside of yourself has ever hurt you. Not once. Not ever. Every moment of suffering you've experienced in your life has been created entirely within your own mind. By your own thoughts, by your own interpretations of what happened. The events themselves were neutral, completely neutral. You added the suffering. This isn't some feel-good philosophy or wishful thinking. This is the most practical, life-changing truth you can possibly understand. When you truly grasp this concept, when you see it clearly for the first time, your entire relationship with pain changes forever. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become the master of your own emotional experience. Let me prove this to you with a simple example. Imagine 2 people receive the exact same text message from their romantic partner. "We need to talk." Person A immediately spirals into panic, convinced this means their relationship is over, creating elaborate scenarios of betrayal and abandonment in their mind. They spend hours in agony, barely able to function. Person B reads the same message and thinks they probably want to discuss something important and goes about their day normally until they can have the conversation. Same message, same external stimulus, completely different emotional experiences. What's the difference? Their thoughts, their interpretations, their internal response to a neutral piece of information. Person A created suffering where none existed. Person B remained at peace. The message itself had no inherent power to cause pain. The pain was generated entirely by the meaning person attached to it. This principle applies to everything. Every breakup, every betrayal, every disappointment, every loss you've ever experienced. The external event was just data, just information about what happened. Your suffering came from what you told yourself that information meant. You created elaborate stories about what it said about you, about your future, about your worth. You compared it to how you thought things should be. You resisted what was and demanded that reality be different. And in that resistance, in that gap between what happened and what you wanted to happen, you created your own suffering. The ancient Stoics understood this with crystal clarity. They knew that the source of all human suffering isn't what happens to us, but how we think about what happens to us. Epictetus, who spent his entire life as a slave and was physically disabled, said something that would echo through history. Men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of things. He lived this principle despite having every external reason to be miserable. He became one of the most influential teachers of mental freedom the world has ever known. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, wrote in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Here was a man who could command armies, who had unlimited external power. Yet he understood that true power came from within. He knew that no external force could disturb his peace unless he allowed it to. But here's where most people get confused. They think this means that bad things don't happen or that we should pretend everything is fine when it's not. That's not what this means at all. Bad things absolutely happen. People die. Relationships end. Businesses fail. People betray us. These are facts. But facts by themselves don't cause suffering. Suffering comes from our resistance to facts. From our insistence that reality should be different than it isn't. When you truly understand this distinction, you realize that you've been giving away your power your entire life. You've been allowing external circumstances to dictate your internal state. You've been living as if you were a puppet with everyone and everything else pulling your strings. But the truth is, you're the one holding all the strings. You always have been. Think about the last time you were really hurt by something someone said to you. What actually happened? Sound waves hit your eardrums. Your brain processed those sound waves into words. Those words triggered thoughts in your mind about what they meant. Those thoughts created emotions. Those emotions created your experience of pain. At what point in this process did the other person actually hurt you? They created sound waves. That's it. Everything else, the entire experience of being hurt, was created by your own mind. This doesn't mean you're weak or wrong for having been hurt. You were never taught this. Nobody ever explained to you that you had a choice in how you experienced external events. From childhood, you were taught the opposite. That when bad things happen, you're supposed to feel bad. That's normal. That's human. But normal doesn't mean optimal. Normal doesn't mean necessary. The most emotionally resilient people in the world, whether they realize it or not, have learned to separate what happens from what they make it mean. They don't waste their energy fighting reality. They don't create elaborate stories about what external events say about them. They deal with facts as facts and maintain their inner equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. This is not about becoming emotionless or uncaring. This is about becoming selective about where you invest your emotional energy. When you stop suffering over things you cannot control, you have enormous amounts of energy available for things you can control. When you stop being reactive to every external stimulus, you become incredibly powerful. The deception that external events hurt you is the foundation of all unnecessary suffering. It keeps you trapped in victim consciousness, constantly at the mercy of circumstances beyond your control. It makes you weak, reactive, and emotionally dependent on the behavior of others. But when you see through this deception, when you recognize it for the illusion it has always been, you step into a completely different way of being. You become emotionally self-reliant. You become the source of your own peace. You become unshakable, not because nothing bad ever happens to you, but because you no longer give external events the power to disturb your inner world. You realize that you are not a victim of your circumstances, but a master of your responses. This is the first and most crucial understanding on your journey to emotional invulnerability. Everything else we'll discuss builds on this foundation until you truly grasp that your suffering is self-created. You'll continue to look for solutions in all the wrong places. You'll try to control other people's behavior. You'll try to prevent bad things from happening. You'll try to create a perfect external world so you can finally be at peace. But once you understand that peace was always an inside job, everything changes. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable and start mastering the one thing you can control, your own mind. And that's where real power begins. Chapter 2. The Stoic Revolution. How Ancient Warriors Became Emotionally Bulletproof. 2,500 years ago in the bustling markets of ancient Athens, a group of philosophers gathered under a painted porch called the Stoa. These weren't ivory tower academics disconnected from real life. They were warriors, emperors, slaves, and merchants who had discovered something extraordinary. A way to remain completely unshakable regardless of what life threw at them. They called their philosophy stoicism, and it would become the most practical system for emotional mastery ever developed. The Stoics lived through plagues, wars, exiles, and the collapse of empires. They faced every form of adversity imaginable. Yet, they maintained an inner calm that seemed almost superhuman to those around them. They weren't born this way. They trained themselves to think differently. They developed mental practices that made them emotionally bulletproof. And their techniques are more relevant today than they've ever been. The foundation of Stoic philosophy rests on one revolutionary insight. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond to what happens to us. This might sound simple, but it's the most radical idea in human psychology. It means that no external force can make you angry, sad, frustrated, or devastated unless you give it permission. It means that your emotional state is always ultimately your choice. Epictetus, who we mentioned earlier, was born into slavery around 50 AD. He was owned by a Roman official and treated as property. His leg was broken by his master and never healed properly, leaving him permanently disabled. By every external measure, he had nothing, no freedom, no possessions, no control over his daily life. Yet this man, who had less external power than almost anyone in his society, became one of the most powerful thinkers in human history. How did he do it? He realized that while his master could control his body, no one could control his mind unless he allowed them to. He understood that freedom wasn't about external circumstances but about internal response. He could choose his thoughts, his interpretations, his reactions. And in that choice, he found a freedom that no one could take away from him. Epictetus taught that there are only two categories of things in life. Things we can control and things we cannot control. Things we can control include our thoughts, our judgments, our decisions, our responses, and our actions. Things we cannot control include other people's behavior, natural disasters, the past, the future, and death. According to Stoic philosophy, all suffering comes from confusing these two categories. We suffer when we try to control what we cannot control or when we fail to control what we can control. This insight transforms everything. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control things that are completely outside their influence. They want their spouse to behave differently. They want their boss to appreciate them more. They want their children to make better choices. They want the economy to improve. They want people to be kinder. They want life to be fair. And because these things are largely outside their control, they live in constant frustration and disappointment. Stoics take a completely different approach. They focus exclusively on what they can control, their own thoughts, decisions, and responses. They don't waste energy trying to change external circumstances. Instead, they change how they think about external circumstances, and in doing so they become infinitely more powerful and peaceful. Marcus Aurelius exemplified this approach. As emperor of Rome, he had more external power than almost any human being in history. He could command armies, build monuments, and shape the fate of nations. Yet in his personal journal, which we now call Meditations, he constantly reminded himself that true power came from within. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, and the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Think about that." The most powerful man in the world understood that happiness and peace were internal jobs. He didn't need to change the world to be at peace. He needed to change his thoughts about the world. The Stoics developed specific mental exercises to train this kind of thinking. One of the most powerful was called negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum. This involved imagining losing the things they valued most: their health, their loved ones, their possessions, even their lives. This wasn't morbid thinking. It was training. By regularly contemplating loss, they became emotionally prepared for it. They appreciated what they had while they had it, and they reduced the shock and suffering when loss inevitably occurred. Another powerful Stoic practice was the view from above. When facing a challenging situation, they would imagine viewing it from a cosmic perspective. How would this problem look from the perspective of the universe? How significant would it be in 100 years? This practice helped them maintain perspective and avoid being overwhelmed by temporary difficulties. The Stoics also practiced objective representation, which meant describing events in purely factual terms without emotional interpretation. Instead of saying, "My business failed and I'm ruined," they would say, "My business ceased operations and I need to find alternative income sources." Instead of, "She broke my heart," they would say, "She ended our relationship and I'm experiencing emotional sensations." This practice removed the emotional charge from events and allowed them to respond more rationally. But perhaps the most powerful Stoic concept was amore fati, love of fate. This didn't mean passive acceptance of whatever happened. It meant actively embracing whatever occurred as exactly what needed to happen for their growth and development. They understood that every challenge was an opportunity to practice virtue, to build character, to become stronger. They didn't just accept difficult circumstances. They welcomed them as training for their minds and souls. This approach created warriors who were virtually impossible to defeat psychologically. They couldn't be intimidated because they didn't fear death. They couldn't be manipulated because they didn't need external validation. They couldn't be broken because they found meaning in every experience, no matter how difficult. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He was also exiled, recalled, made advisor to Emperor Nero, and eventually forced to commit suicide. Through all these dramatic ups and downs, he maintained his equanimity by practicing Stoic principles. He wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." The Stoics understood that most of our suffering comes not from what actually happens to us, but from our thoughts about what happens to us. They realized that we often suffer more from our memories of past events and our anxieties about future events than from present circumstances. They trained themselves to stay present, to deal with what was actually happening rather than what might happen or what had happened. This wasn't about suppressing emotions or becoming robotic. The Stoics felt emotions just like everyone else. But they didn't let emotions control their decisions. They observed their emotions, understood them, and then chose how to respond. They distinguished between the initial automatic emotional reaction which they couldn't control and their sustained emotional response which they could control. For example, if someone insulted them, they might feel an initial flash of anger that's natural and unavoidable, but they wouldn't nurture that anger, feed it with vengeful thoughts, or let it influence their behavior. They would observe the anger, understand why it arose, and then choose how to respond based on their values rather than their emotions. The Stoic revolution was the recognition that emotional mastery is the highest form of power. External power is limited and temporary. It depends on circumstances beyond our control. But internal power, the power to choose our responses, to maintain our values, to find meaning in any situation is unlimited and permanent. No one can take it away from us unless we give it away. This is why Stoicism has survived for over 2,000 years. It's why modern psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and resilience training all draw heavily from Stoic principles. It's why the most successful people in every field, whether they know it or not, practice Stoic thinking. The ancient warriors who followed these principles didn't become emotionally bulletproof by avoiding difficult situations. They became bulletproof by changing how they thought about difficult situations. They realized that the battle for peace and happiness wasn't fought in the external world but in the internal world of thoughts and interpretations. And this same power is available to you. You don't need to be a philosopher or a warrior or an emperor to access it. You just need to understand that your mind is the one territory where you have complete sovereignty. No matter what happens in the external world, you can always choose how to think about it. And in that choice lies the key to emotional freedom. Chapter 3. The Neuroscience of Suffering. What modern brain research reveals about ancient wisdom. For over 2,000 years, the Stoics claimed something that seemed almost impossible, that we could control our emotional responses to external events through conscious thought. Critics dismissed this as unrealistic philosophy, arguing that emotions were automatic, uncontrollable responses to circumstances. They said humans were hardwired to suffer when bad things happened and that trying to think your way out of emotional pain was naive at best. Then modern neuroscience proved the Stoics were absolutely right. Today we understand the human brain in ways that ancient philosophers could never have imagined. We can see how thoughts create emotions, how beliefs shape neural pathways, and how conscious thinking can literally rewire the brain. The most remarkable discovery, the Stoic principles for emotional mastery aren't just philosophically sound, they're neurologically optimal. The ancient wisdom was actually a sophisticated understanding of how the brain works. Your brain is not a single unified system. It's more like a committee of different parts that sometimes work together and sometimes conflict with each other. Understanding these different parts is crucial to understanding why you suffer and how you can stop suffering. The most primitive part of your brain is the LBIC system, which includes the amygdala. This is your survival brain developed over millions of years of evolution to keep you alive in dangerous environments. The amygdala's job is to scan for threats and trigger immediate emotional responses, fear, anger, anxiety that prepare your body for fight, flight, or freeze responses. This system is incredibly fast and powerful, but it's also crude and often inaccurate. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between actual physical threats and psychological threats. It doesn't understand the difference between a tiger chasing you and an email from your boss requesting a meeting. It just detects potential danger and floods your system with stress hormones. This is why you can have the same physiological response to a difficult conversation that your ancestors had to life-threatening situations. But here's the crucial part. The amygdala doesn't think. It just reacts. It processes information incredibly quickly, about 40 milliseconds. But it doesn't analyze, interpret, or consider context. It's like a very sophisticated alarm system that has on the side of caution. Better to have a false alarm than to miss a real threat. The thinking part of your brain is the prefrontal cortex located right behind your forehead. This is where conscious thought, reasoning, planning, and decision-making occur. The prefrontal cortex is much slower than the amygdala. It takes about 500 milliseconds to process information, but it's infinitely more sophisticated. This is where you can analyze situations, consider multiple perspectives, and make conscious choices about how to respond. Here's the key insight that validates ancient Stoic wisdom. The amygdala and prefrontal cortex are in constant communication, and the prefrontal cortex can override the amygdala's responses. You can literally think your way out of emotional reactions. Your conscious mind can intervene between an external stimulus and your emotional response. When something happens to you, your brain goes through a specific sequence. First, Sensory information enters your brain and goes to the thalamus, which acts like a relay station. From there, information travels along two pathways simultaneously. One pathway goes directly to the amygdala. This is the fast emotional route. The other pathway goes to the prefrontal cortex. This is the slower rational route. If you rely only on the amygdala pathway, you experience immediate automatic emotional reactions to events. Someone criticizes you and you instantly feel hurt or angry. You receive bad news and you immediately feel devastated. You face a challenge and you automatically feel anxious. This is what most people experience most of the time. They're at the mercy of their amygdala's interpretations. But if you engage the prefrontal cortex pathway, you can interrupt this automatic process. You can pause between the stimulus and the response. You can consciously choose how to interpret what happened and how to respond to it. This is exactly what the Stoics were training when they practiced observing their thoughts and choosing their responses. Modern research has discovered something even more remarkable. The more you use your prefrontal cortex to override automatic emotional responses, the stronger it becomes. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and create new neural pathways throughout your life. Every time you consciously choose a rational response over an emotional reaction, you're literally rewiring your brain to be less reactive and more resilient. Studies using brain imaging technology have shown that people who practice mindfulness, meditation, and cognitive reframing, all of which are essentially Stoic practices, have measurably different brain structures. They have larger prefrontal cortexes, smaller amygdalas, and stronger connections between the thinking and emotional centers of their brains. They've literally trained their brains to be less reactive and more in control. Dr. Amy Anston, a neuroscientist at Yale, has extensively studied how stress affects the prefrontal cortex. Her research shows that even mild stress can impair prefrontal cortex function, making us more reactive and less rational. But she's also found that people who practice stress reduction techniques, particularly cognitive approaches that involve changing how you think about stressful situations, can maintain prefrontal cortex function even under pressure. This explains why Stoic practices are so effective. When you practice seeing events as neutral until you interpret them, you're keeping your prefrontal cortex engaged instead of letting your amygdala run the show. When you practice focusing on what you can control instead of what you can't control, you're directing your mental energy toward rational problem solving instead of emotional rumination. Dr. Kevin Oxner, a neuroscientist at Columbia University, has conducted extensive research on emotion regulation. His studies show that cognitive reappraisal, changing how you think about a situation to change how you feel about it, is one of the most effective emotion regulation strategies. People who use cognitive reappraisal show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and decreased activity in the amygdala. They literally think their way to emotional calm. The research on rumination provides another crucial insight. Rumination is the tendency to repeatedly think about negative events, analyzing them over and over, usually focusing on what went wrong and why. Studies consistently show that rumination is one of the strongest predictors of depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. Why is rumination so destructive? Because it keeps the amygdala activated long after the triggering event has ended instead of allowing the emotional response to naturally fade. Rumination keeps triggering it over and over. You're essentially giving yourself repeated doses of stress hormones by repeatedly reliving negative events in your mind. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They taught people to observe their thoughts without getting caught up in them. To deal with events once and then move on, and to focus on the present moment rather than rehashing the past or worrying about the future. Modern neuroscience has proven that these practices are neurologically optimal for mental health and emotional resilience. Dr. Daniel Siegel, a psychiatrist and researcher at UCLA, has shown that the simple act of naming your emotions, what he calls "name it to tame it," can reduce amygdala activation and increase prefrontal cortex engagement. When you can accurately identify and label what you're feeling, you activate the rational part of your brain and reduce the emotional part's intensity. This is exactly what Stoics did when they practiced objective observation of their mental states. The research on cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, provides even more validation for Stoic principles. CBT is based on the idea that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected and that changing your thoughts can change your feelings and behaviors. Hundreds of studies have shown that CBT is effective for treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, and many other conditions. The core insight of CBT that how you think determines how you feel is fundamental Stoic wisdom. Dr. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive therapy, identified what he called cognitive distortions, systematic errors in thinking that lead to emotional distress. These include catastrophizing, assuming the worst possible outcome, black and white thinking, seeing things as all good or all bad, and personalization, taking responsibility for things outside your control. The Stoics identified these same thinking errors over 2,000 years ago and developed practices to correct them. Perhaps most remarkably, research on post-traumatic growth shows that people can emerge from traumatic experiences stronger and more resilient than before. Dr. Richard Tadashi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun have found that many people who face severe adversity, serious illness, loss of loved ones, natural disasters report positive changes in their lives. They develop deeper relationships, greater appreciation for life, increased personal strength and enhanced spiritual development. This research validates the Stoic concept of amorti, that difficult experiences can be opportunities for growth if we approach them with the right mindset. The brain is capable of finding meaning and growth in any experience, no matter how painful. If we engage our prefrontal cortex to interpret that experience constructively, the neuroscience is clear. Your brain is designed to learn, adapt, and grow throughout your entire life. You're not stuck with automatic emotional responses to external events. You can train your brain to respond differently. You can develop emotional resilience that seemed impossible to previous generations. The ancient Stoics discovered these principles through careful observation of their own minds and rigorous philosophical reasoning. Modern neuroscientists have discovered the same principles through sophisticated brain imaging technology and controlled experiments. The conclusion is the same. You have far more control over your emotional experience than you've been taught to believe. Your brain is not your enemy. It's not condemning you to automatic suffering whenever bad things happen. Your brain is actually your most powerful ally in developing emotional mastery. You just need to understand how to work with it instead of against it. And that's exactly what the remaining principles in this system will teach you. Chapter 4, The Choice Point. Understanding the space between stimulus and response. There is a moment, a split second between what happens to you and how you respond to what happens to you. In that tiny space lies the difference between emotional mastery and emotional slavery. Most people never notice this space exists. They experience events and emotions as one continuous automatic process. Something happens. They feel a certain way and they believe they had no choice in the matter. But that space is real and it's where all your power lies. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, discovered this space in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. In Nazi concentration camps where external control was absolute and survival was uncertain, he found that one thing remained within his power. How he chose to think about his circumstances. He wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Frankl observed that while prisoners had no control over their external circumstances, they retained complete control over their internal responses. Some prisoners became bitter, hopeless, and broken. Others maintained their dignity, found meaning in their suffering, and even helped fellow prisoners. The external circumstances were identical. The internal responses were completely different. And that difference was determined by conscious choice in the space between stimulus and response. This choice point exists in every moment of your life. When someone cuts you off in traffic, there's a space between the event and your anger. When you receive criticism, there's a space between the words and your hurt feelings. When you face a setback, there's a space between the circumstances and your despair. The question is, are you aware of this space? And are you using it consciously? Most people live their entire lives without ever recognizing this choice point. They experience what psychologists call emotional fusion. They become completely identified with their emotional reactions. They don't think I am experiencing anger. They think I am angry. They don't observe their thoughts. They become their thoughts. They don't notice their interpretations. They mistake their interpretations for reality. This fusion creates the illusion that emotions are automatic and uncontrollable. If someone insults you and you immediately feel hurt, it seems like the insult directly caused the hurt. There doesn't appear to be any space for choice. But that's because the choice happens so quickly, so automatically that you didn't notice it occurring. Here's what actually happens in that split second. You hear the insult. Your brain instantly interprets what it means. Based on that interpretation, your brain triggers an emotional response. You experience that emotion as being directly caused by the insult. But the interpretation step where you decided what the insult meant about you, about the other person, about the situation, was a choice. You just made it so quickly and automatically that it felt like it wasn't a choice at all. The key to emotional mastery is slowing down this process enough to recognize the choice point and make conscious decisions about how to use it. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about understanding that emotions are the result of thoughts and interpretations and that thoughts and interpretations can be chosen. Let's examine this process more carefully. When an external event occurs, your brain immediately begins interpreting what it means. These interpretations happen largely below the level of conscious awareness, but they determine your emotional response. If you interpret an event as threatening, you feel fear. If you interpret it as unfair, you feel anger. If you interpret it as a loss, you feel sadness. But here's the crucial insight. Your interpretations are not facts. They're opinions. They're one possible way of understanding what happened. But they're not the only way. And since they're choices, even unconscious ones, they can be changed. Consider a simple example. You send a text message to a friend and don't receive a response for several hours. Your brain immediately begins generating interpretations. They're ignoring me. They're angry with me. They don't care about our friendship. Something terrible has happened to them. Each of these interpretations creates a different emotional response. Hurt, anxiety, fear, anger. But notice that these are all interpretations, not facts. The only fact is that you sent a message and haven't received a response yet. Everything else is a story your mind is telling about what that means. And you can choose which story to tell. You could just as easily interpret the situation as they're probably busy. They'll respond when they have time. Maybe they didn't see the message. This has nothing to do with our friendship. These interpretations create completely different emotional responses. Calm, patience, understanding. The external circumstance is identical in both cases. The only difference is the story you're telling yourself about what it means. And that story is always a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Developing awareness of the choice point requires practice. Most of us have been making unconscious interpretations for so long that it feels automatic and unchangeable. But like any skill, conscious interpretation can be developed through training. The first step is simply noticing when you're having an emotional reaction. Instead of immediately getting caught up in the emotion, pause and ask yourself, what interpretation am I making about this situation? What story am I telling myself about what this means? This simple question creates space between the stimulus and your response. It engages your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, and gives you an opportunity to choose your interpretation consciously rather than accepting the first automatic interpretation your mind generates. The second step is recognizing that your initial interpretation is just one possibility among many. Ask yourself, what are other ways I could interpret this situation? What would a completely rational person think about this? What would someone who cared about me advise me to think about this? This doesn't mean you should always choose the most positive interpretation possible. That's not realistic or helpful. It means you should choose the most accurate, useful interpretation. The one that's most aligned with facts rather than fears. The one that empowers you rather than victimizes you. The one that moves you toward your goals rather than away from them. The third step is consciously choosing your interpretation and your response based on the most accurate and useful way of understanding the situation. How do you want to respond? What would be most aligned with your values? What would be most likely to create the outcome you want? This process might seem slow and cumbersome at first, but with practice, it becomes incredibly fast. Eventually, you develop the ability to recognize choice points and make conscious interpretations almost instantaneously. You become skilled at catching automatic interpretations before they create unwanted emotional responses. Advanced practitioners of this skill report a profound sense of emotional freedom. They still experience the full range of human emotions, but they're no longer at the mercy of those emotions. They choose when to be angry and when to be calm. They choose when to grieve and when to let go. They choose when to be concerned and when to be confident. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. It's about becoming emotionally intelligent. It's about understanding that emotions are information, not commands. They tell you something about how you're interpreting a situation, but they don't have to dictate your behavior. When you master the choice point, you realize that emotional resilience isn't about being tough enough to endure whatever happens to you. It's about being wise enough to choose your responses to whatever happens to you. It's about recognizing that while you can't control external events, you have complete control over the space between those events and your responses to them. This space, this choice point, is where all emotional mastery begins. It's where you stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of your own experience. It's where you discover that no one and nothing outside of yourself has the power to make you feel anything unless you give them that power. And once you understand this, once you really see that this choice exists in every moment, your entire relationship with life changes. You stop being afraid of what might happen to you because you know you can choose how to respond to whatever happens. You stop trying to control other people's behavior because you know your peace doesn't depend on their behavior. You stop being a victim of your emotions because you understand that your emotions are the result of your choices. The space between stimulus and response is where freedom lies. It's where power lives. It's where peace lives, and it's available to you in every single moment of your life. Chapter 5. Emotional Alchemy. Transforming pain into power through conscious interpretation. The medieval alchemists sought to transform base metals into gold, spending lifetimes in pursuit of a process that would turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. They never succeeded in their literal quest, but they discovered something far more valuable: the principles of transformation themselves. Today we have access to a form of alchemy that actually works. The ability to transform emotional pain into personal power through the conscious interpretation of our experiences. Every painful experience in your life contains raw material for growth, strength, and wisdom. But like ore that contains precious metals, this raw material must be processed, refined, and consciously extracted. Most people leave this potential buried in their pain, focusing only on the surface-level suffering and missing the deeper treasure beneath. Emotional alchemy is the conscious practice of extracting maximum value from every experience, especially the difficult ones. It's based on the understanding that the meaning of any event is not inherent in the event itself but in how you choose to interpret and integrate that event into your life story. This isn't about positive thinking or denial. It's about consciously choosing interpretations that serve your growth and development rather than limiting them. The foundation of emotional alchemy is the recognition that pain and growth are intimately connected. Every moment of genuine growth in your life has involved some form of discomfort, challenge, or pain. This isn't coincidence. It's how human development works. Your comfort zone, by definition, contains everything you already know how to handle. Growth requires moving beyond what's comfortable and familiar. Think about the physical development of your body. Muscles grow stronger only when they're challenged beyond their current capacity. The stress of resistance training creates microscopic damage to muscle fibers, which then rebuild stronger than before. Bones become denser when subjected to appropriate stress. The cardiovascular system becomes more efficient when regularly challenged. Your emotional and psychological development follows the same principle. Your capacity for resilience grows when you successfully navigate difficult situations. Your confidence increases when you face fears and overcome them. Your wisdom deepens when you learn from painful experiences. Your strength develops when you endure and transcend challenges that once seemed impossible. But here's the crucial distinction. Physical growth happens automatically when you apply the right stress to your body. Emotional growth requires conscious participation. You must actively choose to extract lessons, strength, and wisdom from your painful experiences. If you simply endure suffering without conscious processing, you may become harder or more bitter, but you won't necessarily become stronger or wiser. The first principle of emotional alchemy is reframing adversity as training. Instead of viewing difficult experiences as things that happen to you, view them as training that happens for you. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice resilience. Every setback becomes a chance to develop problem-solving skills. Every disappointment becomes training in emotional regulation. When you adopt this perspective, your entire relationship with adversity changes. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and become a student of your circumstances. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" You stop trying to avoid all discomfort and start seeking to extract maximum value from whatever discomfort you encounter. This doesn't mean you should seek out unnecessary suffering or remain in harmful situations. It means that when difficulties arise, and they inevitably will, you can choose to use them as raw material for your development rather than simply enduring them passively. The second principle of emotional alchemy is conscious meaning making. Every experience in your life can be interpreted in multiple ways. The interpretation you choose determines whether that experience strengthens you or weakens you, whether it moves you forward or holds you back. Consider someone who experiences a betrayal in a close relationship. They could interpret this experience in ways that diminish them. "I'm a poor judge of character. People can't be trusted. I'm destined to be hurt by those I care about." These interpretations create learned helplessness, cynicism, and emotional withdrawal, or they could interpret the same experience in ways that strengthen them. I've learned important red flags to watch for in future relationships. I've discovered my capacity to survive and recover from betrayal. I now know that my worth isn't determined by how others treat me. These interpretations create wisdom, resilience, and emotional strength. The external facts are identical in both cases. The only difference is the meaning assigned to those facts. And that meaning is always a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. The third principle is temporal reframing. Changing your perspective on the timing and duration of pain. Acute emotional pain feels permanent when you're experiencing it. Your brain, in an effort to protect you, makes you believe that current pain will last forever. This creates additional suffering on top of the original pain. Emotional alchemy involves remembering that all emotional states are temporary. The pain you're experiencing now will change and eventually fade. This isn't minimizing the reality of present pain. It's maintaining perspective about its temporary nature. Furthermore, many experiences that feel catastrophic in the moment prove to be beneficial in the long run. The job loss that forces you to discover a better career path. The relationship that ends and allows you to meet someone more compatible. The health scare that motivates you to make positive lifestyle changes. The financial setback that teaches you valuable lessons about money management. This doesn't mean everything happens for a predetermined reason. It means you can choose to find or create reasons that serve your growth and development. You can consciously extract value from any experience regardless of why it originally occurred. The fourth principle is strength cataloging. consciously recognizing and recording the strengths you develop through difficult experiences. Most people focus so intensely on their pain during difficult times that they completely miss the strengths they're developing. When you successfully navigate a challenging period, you don't just return to your previous state. You become stronger, wiser, and more capable. You develop new skills, discover hidden resources, and expand your capacity to handle future challenges. But these gains are often so gradual and subtle that they go unnoticed unless you consciously look for them. Make it a practice to identify and catalog the strengths you develop through each difficult experience. What skills did you use? What resources did you discover? What did you learn about your own capabilities? How are you different now than you were before this experience? This isn't about forced gratitude or fake positivity. It's about accurate recognition of your actual growth and development. When you consciously acknowledge the strengths you've gained through adversity, you build confidence in your ability to handle future challenges. The fifth principle is legacy thinking. Considering how your current experience fits into the larger story of your life and what you want that story to represent. Instead of getting lost in the immediate details of your current struggle, step back and consider the bigger picture. What kind of person do you want to become? What kind of life do you want to create? How can your current experience, painful as it might be, contribute to that larger vision? What would you want your future self to learn from this experience? What example do you want to set for others who might face similar challenges? This perspective helps you endure temporary pain for long-term growth. It helps you make decisions based on your values rather than your immediate emotions. It transforms suffering from meaningless endurance into purposeful development. The final principle of emotional alchemy is teaching and sharing. One of the most powerful ways to transform pain into power is to use your experiences to help others facing similar challenges. When you share your struggles and the lessons you've learned, you accomplish several things simultaneously. First, you solidify your own learning. Teaching forces you to organize and articulate the insights you've gained. Second, you create meaning and purpose from your pain by using it to benefit others. Third, you build connections with people who understand your experience. Fourth, you often gain new perspectives on your own situation by hearing how others have handled similar challenges. This doesn't mean you should share your personal struggles with everyone or turn your pain into your primary identity. It means that at appropriate times and in appropriate contexts, your willingness to be vulnerable about your challenges and share what you've learned can transform your pain into a source of value for both yourself and others. Emotional alchemy is not about denying the reality of pain or pretending that all experiences are equally pleasant. Pain is real and some experiences are genuinely difficult and traumatic. The goal is not to eliminate pain but to ensure that pain serves a purpose in your development rather than simply diminishing your capacity for joy and effectiveness. When you practice emotional alchemy consistently, you develop what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. The ability to emerge from difficult experiences stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. You begin to view challenges as opportunities rather than threats. You develop confidence in your ability to handle whatever life presents to you. Most importantly, you realize that no experience, no matter how painful, has the power to permanently damage you. Unless you allow it to, you always retain the power to choose what your experiences mean and how they shape your future. In that choice lies the ultimate freedom. The freedom to transform any pain into power, any setback into strength, any wound into wisdom. This is the true alchemy. Not turning metal into gold, but turning suffering into strength, confusion into clarity and pain into power. And unlike the medieval alchemist's elusive dreams, this transformation is completely within your control. Chapter 6: The 4 Pillars of Emotional Invulnerability. Building an unshakable inner foundation. Now that you understand the fundamental principles behind emotional mastery, it's time to build a systematic framework for applying them in your daily life. Emotional invulnerability isn't achieved through a single insight or technique. It's built on 4 fundamental pillars that work together to create an unshakable inner foundation. Master these 4 pillars and no external circumstance will ever have the power to destroy your peace again. The first pillar is radical acceptance of what island. This doesn't mean passive resignation or approval of everything that happens. It means acknowledging reality exactly as it exists without wasting energy fighting against facts. Most people spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy resisting what has already happened or what is currently happening. They replay scenarios in their minds, wishing things had gone differently. They argue with reality, insisting that things should be other than they are. This resistance creates a double layer of suffering. First, there's the pain of the original situation. Second, there's the additional pain of fighting against the reality of that situation. When you practice radical acceptance, you eliminate the second layer of suffering entirely. You deal with what is rather than what you wish were true. Radical acceptance begins with a simple recognition. Reality is reality, regardless of your opinion about it. Your approval or disapproval doesn't change what has already occurred. Your resistance doesn't alter current circumstances. Your mental arguments don't modify facts. When you truly understand this, you stop wasting energy on impossible tasks and redirect that energy toward possible solutions. This doesn't mean you can't work to change future circumstances. It means you start from an accurate understanding of present circumstances. You can't solve problems effectively while denying their existence. You can't move forward productively while mentally remaining stuck in how things should have been different. The second pillar is detachment from outcomes. This is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in emotional mastery. Detachment doesn't mean not caring about results. It means not allowing your peace of mind to be dependent on specific outcomes occurring. You can work toward goals with complete dedication while maintaining inner equilibrium regardless of whether those goals are achieved. Most people make their happiness conditional on external results. They think they'll be happy when they get the promotion, find the relationship, achieve the financial goal, or receive the recognition they're seeking. This creates an unstable foundation for peace because external results are never entirely under your control. No matter how hard you work or how well you plan, factors beyond your influence can always affect outcomes. When you practice detachment from outcomes, you find your satisfaction in the process rather than the results. You derive peace from knowing you've done your best with what's under your control, regardless of how external factors influence the final outcome. This creates unshakable confidence because it's based on your efforts and choices rather than on variables you cannot control. Detachment also prevents the emotional roller coaster that comes from tying your self-worth to external achievements. When you succeed, you remain grounded because you know success doesn't define your value. When you face setbacks, you remain stable because you know temporary results don't determine your worth. The third pillar is emotional independence. This means your emotional state is determined by your own thoughts and choices, not by other people's behavior, moods, or opinions. Most people are emotionally dependent on others without realizing it. Their mood changes based on how others treat them. Their confidence fluctuates based on external validation. Their peace depends on other people's approval. Emotional independence doesn't mean isolation or not caring about relationships. It means maintaining your own emotional center regardless of how others behave. You can be kind, loving, and caring without making your happiness dependent on receiving kindness, love, and care in return. When you achieve emotional independence, you become much more attractive and effective in relationships. People are drawn to those who are secure in themselves. You can give love freely without keeping score. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can handle conflict without becoming reactive. You become a stable positive force rather than someone who requires constant emotional management from others. The fourth pillar is present moment awareness. Most emotional suffering occurs when your mind is focused on the past or the future rather than the present. You suffer when you replay painful memories or anticipate feared scenarios. But life only exists in the present moment. The past is gone and cannot be changed. The future hasn't happened and may never happen as you imagine it. When you train yourself to stay present, you eliminate most sources of unnecessary suffering. Present moment challenges are usually manageable. It's when you add the weight of past regrets and future anxieties that situations become overwhelming. Present moment awareness allows you to deal with what actually requires your attention right now rather than being distracted by mental phantoms. These 4 pillars work synergistically. Radical acceptance helps you stay present by preventing mental arguments with reality. Detachment from outcomes reduces anxiety about the future. Emotional independence prevents past relationship wounds from contaminating current interactions. Present moment awareness supports all the other pillars by keeping you grounded in what's actually happening rather than lost in mental stories. Building these pillars requires daily practice. Like physical fitness, emotional fitness must be maintained through consistent training. Each difficult situation you encounter becomes an opportunity to strengthen these pillars. Each time you choose acceptance over resistance, detachment over attachment, independence over dependence, and presence over mental time travel, you become more emotionally invulnerable. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional responses. The goal is to ensure that your emotional responses are conscious choices rather than automatic reactions. You still feel emotions, but you're no longer controlled by them. You still care about outcomes, but your peace isn't dependent on them. You still value relationships, but your self-worth isn't determined by them. When these 4 pillars are strong, you become like a mountain in a storm. The weather around you may be turbulent, but your foundation remains unshakable. External circumstances may change, but your inner stability is constant. This isn't cold indifference. It's warm strength. It's the ability to remain compassionate and engaged while being unaffected by the chaos and drama that disturb others. Chapter 7. The Ancient Art of Cognitive Distancing. Observing your mind without being controlled by it. One of the most powerful discoveries in human psychology is that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes your thoughts. This distinction might seem subtle, but it's the difference between being enslaved by your mental activity and being free to choose how you respond to it. The ancient philosophers understood this principle intimately, and modern neuroscience has confirmed its validity. Learning to observe your mind without being controlled by it is perhaps the most liberating skill you can develop. Most people live in complete identification with their thoughts. When a thought appears in their mind, they automatically believe it's true and important. When an emotion arises, they become that emotion. When a memory surfaces, they're transported back to that experience as if it were happening now. They have no distance between themselves and their mental activity. This identification with thoughts and emotions creates enormous suffering. Negative thoughts feel absolutely real and urgent. Painful emotions seem permanent and overwhelming. Anxious projections about the future feel like accurate predictions. Guilty replays of the past feel like current reality. Without the ability to observe your mental activity objectively, you're at the mercy of whatever happens to arise in your consciousness. Cognitive distancing is the practice of stepping back from your thoughts and emotions to observe them objectively. Like a scientist studying interesting phenomena, instead of being your thoughts, you become the aware observer of your thoughts. Instead of being controlled by emotions, you become curious about emotions. This shift in perspective is profound and immediately liberating. The Stoic philosophers developed sophisticated practices for cognitive distancing. Marcus Aurelius regularly wrote observations about his own mental states. In his personal journal, he would note his thoughts, examine his reactions, and remind himself of fundamental principles. Epictetus taught students to observe their judgments and opinions as separate from external facts. Seneca practiced viewing his daily experiences from multiple perspectives to avoid being trapped in single interpretations. Modern mindfulness meditation is essentially the same practice. You sit quietly and observe whatever arises in your consciousness, thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories without judging them or trying to change them. You simply notice what's happening in your mind without becoming identified with it. This practice develops what psychologists call metacognition, awareness of your own thinking processes. The key insight that makes cognitive distancing possible is understanding that thoughts are mental events, not absolute truths. A thought is just neural activity in your brain, no different from any other biological process. The fact that you can think something doesn't make it true, important, or worth following. Thoughts arise automatically based on past conditioning, current circumstances, and random neural firing. They don't represent your deepest wisdom or most accurate perceptions. When you practice cognitive distancing, you begin to notice patterns in your thinking that you never saw before. You realize that certain types of thoughts arise in predictable situations. You see how your mind automatically jumps to worst-case scenarios when you're tired or stressed. You observe how it creates elaborate stories based on minimal evidence. You notice how it tends to ruminate on certain topics while avoiding others. This awareness is incredibly valuable because it allows you to stop taking your thoughts so seriously. You realize that your mind is often unreliable, biased, and reactive. This doesn't mean you should ignore your thoughts completely, but it means you should evaluate them carefully before believing them or acting on them. The practice of cognitive distancing begins with simple observation. Throughout your day, periodically step back and notice what's happening in your mind. What thoughts are present? What emotions are you experiencing? What mental stories are you telling yourself about current situations? Don't try to change anything initially. Just develop the habit of observing your mental activity objectively. As you become more skilled at observation, you can begin questioning your thoughts more systematically. When you notice a thought that's creating emotional distress, ask yourself, is this thought actually true? Is it helpful? Is it based on facts or on fears? What would I tell a friend who was having this thought? What's a more accurate or balanced way to view this situation? This questioning process isn't about positive thinking or denial. It's about developing intellectual honesty about your mental activity. Most thoughts, especially negative ones, contain some element of truth, but are exaggerated, incomplete, or skewed in unhelpful directions. By examining your thoughts more carefully, you can extract whatever useful information they contain while discarding the distortions and exaggerations. Another powerful cognitive distancing technique is labeling your mental activity. Instead of saying I am angry, say I'm experiencing anger. Instead of I'm a failure, try I'm having thoughts about failure. Instead of this situation is terrible, observe, I'm interpreting this situation as terrible. These subtle linguistic changes create psychological distance between you and your mental activity. You can also practice viewing your thoughts from different perspectives. If you're worried about a future event, ask yourself, how will this matter in 5 years? What would a completely rational person think about this situation? What would someone who loves me advise me to think? What would I think about this if it were happening to someone else? Timed distancing is another valuable technique. When experiencing intense emotions, remind yourself that this mental state is temporary. All thoughts and emotions arise and pass away. The anger you're feeling right now will fade. The anxiety you're experiencing will diminish. The sadness that seems overwhelming will lighten. Nothing in your mental experience is permanent. As you develop skill in cognitive distancing, you'll notice that your relationship with difficult thoughts and emotions changes dramatically. Instead of being afraid of negative mental states, you become curious about them. Instead of trying to avoid or suppress unwanted thoughts, you observe them with interest. Instead of being controlled by your emotions, you use them as information about how you're interpreting situations. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected from your inner life. You actually become more aware of your thoughts and emotions, not less. But that awareness is no longer filtered through identification and reactivity. You can experience the full range of human emotions without being enslaved by them. You can acknowledge difficult thoughts without believing they represent ultimate truth. The ultimate goal of cognitive distancing is freedom. Freedom from being controlled by automatic mental reactions. Freedom from believing every thought that arises in your consciousness. Freedom from being emotionally hijacked by temporary mental states. When you master this skill, You become the conscious director of your inner experience rather than a passive victim of your mental activity. Chapter 8. Rewriting Your Inner Narrative. How to become the author of your own story. Every human being lives according to a story. This story explains who you are, why things happen to you, what you're capable of, and what you can expect from life. Most people never consciously examine this story. Yet, it determines almost everything about their experience. It shapes their expectations, influences their decisions, and creates self-fulfilling prophecies that reinforce its basic themes. The problem is that most people's inner narratives were written by others and during times when they had limited understanding of themselves and the world. These stories were created through interpretations of childhood experiences, conclusions drawn from limited data and meanings assigned to events by an immature mind trying to make sense of complex situations. Many people carry narratives like "I'm not good enough," "life is unfair," "people can't be trusted," "I always get hurt," or "good things don't last." These stories feel absolutely true because they've been reinforced by selective attention to confirming evidence and creative interpretation of ambiguous situations. But they're not truth. They're just stories, and stories can be rewritten. Taking conscious control of your inner narrative is one of the most powerful things you can do for your emotional well-being and life satisfaction. When you become the deliberate author of your own story, you stop being a victim of random circumstances and start being the hero of your own journey. The first step in rewriting your inner narrative is becoming aware of your current story. Most people never examine the fundamental beliefs and assumptions that guide their lives. They operate according to unconscious narratives that they inherited or adopted without question. Pay attention to the automatic thoughts that arise when you face challenges, the assumptions you make about why things happen, and the expectations you have about future outcomes. Listen to the language you use when describing yourself and your experiences. Do you tend to use victim language, "this always happens to me," or empowered language, "I can handle whatever happens"? Do you focus on what's wrong or what's possible? Do you interpret setbacks as evidence of your limitations or as opportunities for growth? Notice the recurring themes in your life story. What patterns keep showing up? What types of situations trigger the strongest emotional reactions? What beliefs about yourself and the world seem to be confirmed repeatedly? These patterns often reveal the deeper narrative themes that are operating below conscious awareness. Once you're aware of your current narrative, you can begin evaluating whether it's serving you. A helpful narrative is one that empowers you, encourages growth, promotes resilience, and creates positive expectations about the future. An unhelpful narrative is one that limits you, keeps you stuck in victim mentality, creates learned helplessness, and generates pessimistic expectations. The key insight is that no narrative is objectively true. Life is complex and contains enough evidence to support almost any story you want to tell about it. Optimists and pessimists can look at the same events and find completely different meanings. Success-oriented people and failure-oriented people can interpret identical situations in opposite ways. The question isn't which interpretation is true, but which interpretation is most useful for creating the kind of life you want to live. When rewriting your narrative, focus on themes that promote growth, resilience, and empowerment. Instead of "I'm unlucky," try "I'm learning to recognize and create opportunities." Instead of "people always disappoint me," consider "I'm becoming better at choosing trustworthy people and setting appropriate boundaries." Instead of "I can't handle stress," explore "I'm developing stronger coping skills through each challenge I face." This isn't about denial or forced positivity. It's about choosing interpretations that serve your development rather than limit it. You're not pretending that difficult things don't happen. You're choosing to see difficult things as training for strength rather than evidence of weakness. One powerful technique for narrative rewriting is the hero's journey framework. In this archetypal story structure, the protagonist faces challenges, overcomes obstacles, develops new abilities, and emerges transformed. Instead of viewing yourself as a victim of circumstances, you can choose to see yourself as a hero in training, with each difficulty serving as preparation for greater challenges and achievements. This perspective transforms your relationship with adversity. Setbacks become plot twists that make your story more interesting. Failures become learning experiences that develop your character. Conflicts become opportunities to practice new skills. Pain becomes evidence that you're growing beyond your previous limitations. Another approach is to focus on your agency and influence rather than on things outside your control. Victim narratives emphasize how external forces determine your experience. Empowered narratives focus on how your choices and responses shape your outcomes. Even when you can't control what happens to you, you can always control how you interpret and respond to what happens. Pay attention to the stories you tell others about your experiences. The way you describe your life to other people often reveals and reinforces your inner narrative. If you consistently tell stories that emphasize how unfairly you've been treated, how unlucky you are, or how difficult your life is, you're reinforcing a victim narrative. If you focus on lessons learned, growth experienced, and strengths developed, you're reinforcing an empowered narrative. Consider writing your story from multiple perspectives. How would a wise mentor describe your journey? What would someone who admires your resilience say about your experiences? How would a loving friend interpret the challenges you faced? These alternative perspectives can help you see possibilities and strengths that you might miss when viewing your life through habitual narrative filters. The stories you tell about your future are just as important as the stories you tell about your past. If you expect good things to happen, you're more likely to notice opportunities and take actions that create positive outcomes. If you expect disappointment and failure, you're more likely to behave in ways that fulfill those expectations. Develop narratives about your future that are both realistic and inspiring instead of vague positive thinking. Create specific visions of how you want to grow, what you want to contribute, and how you want to handle future challenges. Base these narratives on your actual strengths and capabilities while stretching toward your potential. Remember that changing your inner narrative is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Your story will continue to evolve as you gain new experiences and develop greater self-standing. The goal isn't to create a perfect story, but to maintain conscious authorship of your story. You want to be actively choosing the meanings, themes, and expectations that guide your life rather than passively accepting whatever narrative happened to develop through unconscious processes. When you master the art of conscious narrative creation, you gain tremendous power over your emotional experience and life direction. You stop being a character in someone else's story and become the author of your own epic. You realize that while you can't control all the events in your life, you can always control the story you tell about those events. And that story, more than the events themselves, determines the quality of your experience and the trajectory of your future. Chapter 9. The Shield of Indifference. Strategic Emotional Detachment for Maximum Protection. There is an ancient Stoic practice so powerful that it can make you virtually immune to emotional manipulation, social pressure, and the opinions of others. It's called the discipline of desire, or what we might today call strategic emotional detachment. This isn't about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about developing the ability to remain emotionally centered regardless of external circumstances or other people's behavior. Strategic emotional detachment is based on a profound insight. Most of your emotional suffering comes not from what people do to you, but from your emotional investment in what people do to you. When you're heavily invested in specific outcomes or behaviors from others, you become vulnerable to disappointment, frustration, and manipulation. When you practice strategic detachment, you maintain your emotional equilibrium regardless of how others behave. This concept is often misunderstood as indifference or apathy, but that's not what true detachment means. You can care about people and situations while remaining emotionally detached from specific outcomes. You can work toward goals with dedication while maintaining inner peace regardless of results. You can love others while not being dependent on their behavior for your happiness. The key distinction is between caring and attachment. Caring is a choice to value something or someone. Attachment is emotional dependency on external conditions being a certain way. You can care deeply about your relationships while being detached from controlling how other people behave in those relationships. You can care about your work while being detached from receiving specific recognition or rewards. Strategic detachment begins with understanding what you can and cannot control. You can control your own actions, responses, and decisions. You cannot control other people's choices, natural events, or the outcomes of your efforts. When you become emotionally attached to things outside your control, you set yourself up for suffering. When you focus your emotional investment only on things within your control, you maintain consistent peace and power. One of the most liberating applications of strategic detachment is in your relationships with other people. Most interpersonal suffering comes from attachment to how others should behave. You want your family members to appreciate you more. You want your colleagues to recognize your contributions. You want your friends to be more supportive. You want your romantic partner to express love in specific ways. These desires are natural and understandable. But when you become emotionally dependent on them being fulfilled, you give other people tremendous power over your emotional state. Your happiness becomes contingent on their choices. Your peace depends on their behavior. Your self-worth fluctuates based on their treatment of you. Strategic detachment means maintaining your emotional center regardless of how others behave. You can prefer certain behaviors and work to encourage them through your own actions. But your inner stability doesn't depend on receiving them. You become like a thermostat that maintains consistent temperature regardless of external weather conditions. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment or remain in harmful relationships. Strategic detachment actually makes you more effective at setting boundaries and making good relationship decisions because your judgment isn't clouded by emotional desperation or attachment. You can evaluate relationships based on their actual quality rather than on your emotional investment in specific outcomes. Another crucial application is detachment from social opinions and judgments. Most people live in constant anxiety about what others think of them. They modify their behavior to gain approval, avoid expressing authentic opinions to prevent criticism, and experience emotional turmoil when they encounter disapproval or rejection. Strategic detachment from social opinion means understanding that other people's thoughts about you are completely outside your control and ultimately irrelevant to your actual worth and happiness. People will form opinions based on their own perspectives, experiences, and biases. These opinions say more about them than about you, and they change based on factors that have nothing to do with you. When you practice this form of detachment, you become free to be authentic. You can express your genuine thoughts and feelings without being controlled by fear of judgment. You can pursue your actual goals rather than goals designed to impress others. You can make decisions based on your values rather than on social expectations. Detachment from outcomes is another powerful application. Most people make their happiness conditional on achieving specific results. They think they'll be satisfied when they reach certain milestones, acquire particular possessions, or receive desired recognition. This creates a perpetual state of dissatisfaction because there's always another goal to achieve, another possession to acquire, another form of recognition to seek. Strategic detachment means finding satisfaction in the process rather than the outcomes. You can work toward goals with complete dedication while maintaining inner peace regardless of results. This doesn't reduce your effectiveness. It often increases it because you're not paralyzed by fear of failure or desperate for success. The practice of strategic detachment requires daily training. Like physical fitness, emotional detachment must be developed and maintained through consistent practice. Each situation that triggers attachment provides an opportunity to practice letting go of emotional investment in uncontrollable factors. Start by identifying your current attachments. What outcomes are you emotionally dependent on? What behaviors from others do you need to feel secure? What external validations are you seeking? What future scenarios are you anxious about? These attachments are the source of most of your emotional vulnerability. Practice mental exercises that weaken these attachments. Imagine losing the things you're attached to and finding peace anyway. Visualize other people behaving in ways you don't prefer and maintaining your emotional center. Picture scenarios where your desired outcomes don't occur and you respond with equanimity rather than devastation. This isn't negative thinking. It's psychological preparation by mentally rehearsing non-attachment. You develop the emotional skills to handle actual disappointments with grace and strength. You reduce the power that external circumstances have over your inner state. Develop alternative sources of satisfaction that are completely within your control instead of depending on others for validation. Learn to validate yourself based on your own standards and values. Instead of waiting for external circumstances to make you happy, find ways to create contentment from your own thoughts and activities. The ultimate goal of strategic detachment is emotional sovereignty, the ability to maintain your inner state regardless of external conditions. When you achieve this, you become incredibly powerful because nothing external can disturb your peace. You can engage fully with life while remaining centered and grounded. You can love others without being emotionally dependent on them. You can pursue goals without being desperate for outcomes. This emotional sovereignty makes you much more attractive and effective in all your relationships and endeavors. People are drawn to those who are secure in themselves. You can give love freely because you're not keeping score. You can take risks because you're not afraid of failure. You can be generous because you're not dependent on reciprocation. Strategic detachment is not emotional numbness. It's emotional wisdom. It's the ability to feel emotions without being controlled by them, to care about things without being attached to them, and to engage with life while maintaining your inner freedom. Master this practice and you become virtually immune to the emotional turbulence that destroys most people's peace and happiness. Chapter 10. Building Unbreakable Mental Resilience. Advanced Techniques for Emotional Invulnerability. After understanding the principles and practicing the foundational techniques, you're ready to develop truly advanced mental resilience. This level of emotional mastery goes beyond simply managing difficult emotions. It involves developing the capacity to thrive under pressure, find opportunity in adversity, and maintain peak performance regardless of external circumstances. Unbreakable mental resilience is built on 3 advanced capabilities: anti-fragility, emotional granularity, and rapid recovery. These skills transform you from someone who merely survives difficult experiences to someone who becomes stronger through them. Anti-fragility is a concept developed by philosopher Nassim Taleb that describes systems that actually benefit from stress, volatility, and disorder. Most people are fragile. They break under pressure. Some people are resilient. They resist pressure and return to their original state. But anti-fragile people actually grow stronger from pressure. They don't just survive adversity, they use it as fuel for development. You can develop anti-fragility by changing how you interpret and respond to stressful experiences. Instead of viewing challenges as threats to avoid, you begin to see them as training opportunities. Instead of trying to create a stress-free life, you actively seek out appropriate challenges that stretch your capabilities. This requires a fundamental shift in your relationship with discomfort. Most people try to minimize discomfort and maximize comfort. But comfort is where skills stagnate and strength atrophies. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone. In the space where you're challenged but not overwhelmed, develop the habit of voluntary discomfort. Regularly expose yourself to manageable stresses that build your capacity to handle involuntary stresses. This might include physical challenges like cold exposure or difficult workouts, mental challenges like learning complex skills, or emotional challenges like having difficult conversations or taking social risks. The key is choosing your challenges rather than having them chosen for you. When you voluntarily face difficulties, you build confidence in your ability to handle involuntary difficulties. You develop a wide range of coping strategies and prove to yourself repeatedly that you can thrive under pressure. Emotional granularity is the ability to identify and distinguish between subtle emotional states. Most people have limited emotional vocabulary and experience emotions in broad and differentiated categories like good or bad, stressed or relaxed. This lack of precision makes it difficult to understand what's actually happening in their inner world and respond appropriately. Advanced emotional resilience requires developing sophisticated awareness of your emotional landscape. Instead of simply feeling bad, you learn to distinguish between disappointment, frustration, sadness, anxiety, anger, and dozens of other specific emotional states. Each of these emotions provides different information and calls for different responses. Practice expanding your emotional vocabulary. When you notice an emotional state, take time to identify it precisely. Are you feeling overwhelmed or just challenged? Are you sad or just tired? Are you angry or just frustrated? The more precisely you can identify your emotions, the more effectively you can respond to them. This precision also helps you communicate more effectively with others. Instead of saying, "I feel bad about this situation," you might say, "I feel disappointed that this didn't work out as planned, but I'm optimistic about finding alternative solutions." This level of emotional clarity reduces misunderstandings and helps others understand how to support you. Rapid recovery is the ability to return to baseline emotional functioning quickly after experiencing stress or trauma. While everyone experiences difficult emotions, resilient people don't stay stuck in those states for extended periods. They feel their emotions fully but move through them efficiently. Rapid recovery depends on several factors. First, you must avoid rumination. The tendency to repeatedly think about negative experiences. Rumination keeps traumatic events active in your nervous system long after they've ended instead of analyzing what went wrong over and over. Process the experience once to extract useful lessons. Then redirect your attention to current opportunities and challenges. Second, develop strong practices for emotional regulation. This includes breathing techniques, meditation, physical exercise, and other activities that help you return to a calm, centered state. The goal isn't to suppress emotions, but to prevent them from lingering longer than necessary. Third, maintain perspective about the temporary nature of all emotional states. Remind yourself that even intense emotions will fade if you don't artificially sustain them through rumination or dramatic thinking. Your nervous system is designed to return to baseline after stress. But this natural process can be disrupted by mental habits that keep stress responses active. Advanced resilience also requires developing metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about your thinking. This means becoming aware of your mental patterns, recognizing when you're engaging in unhelpful thought processes, and consciously redirecting your mental energy toward more useful activities. Monitor your mental diet just as carefully as you monitor your physical diet. What ideas are you consuming through books, media, and conversations? What mental patterns are you reinforcing through repetition? Are your thought habits building your resilience or undermining it? Create mental rituals that help you maintain optimal psychological functioning. This might include daily reflection practices, regular goal-setting sessions, or weekly reviews of your emotional patterns and responses. Just as athletes follow training regimens to maintain peak physical condition, you need consistent practices to maintain peak mental condition. Develop a personal mission or sense of purpose that's larger than your immediate comfort and happiness. People who have strong sense of meaning are able to endure greater difficulties because they understand how their suffering serves a larger purpose. When you know why you're willing to face challenges, you can handle much more intense challenges. Finally, build a support network of people who share your commitment to growth and resilience. Surround yourself with individuals who encourage your development rather than enable your limitations. Seek out mentors who have demonstrated the kind of mental strength you want to develop. Create relationships based on mutual support for each other's highest potential. Remember that building unbreakable mental resilience is a lifelong practice, not a destination. There will always be new challenges that test your capabilities and opportunities to develop greater strength. The goal isn't to eliminate all possibility of being affected by difficult circumstances, but to develop such strong emotional fitness that you can handle whatever life presents while maintaining your essential sense of purpose and well-being. When you achieve this level of mental resilience, you discover something remarkable. You become genuinely unafraid of what life might bring you. Not because nothing bad will ever happen, but because you know you can handle whatever happens. This fearlessness allows you to take risks, pursue ambitious goals, and live authentically because you're no longer controlled by anxiety about potential outcomes. You realize that your emotional state is the one domain where you have complete sovereignty. And in that sovereignty lies a freedom that no external circumstances can ever take away from you. Chapter 11. The Armor of Expectations. How to Want Without Attachment and Love Without Fear. The greatest source of emotional pain in human relationships comes from the gap between what we expect and what actually happens. We expect people to behave in certain ways, relationships to develop according to our preferences, and situations to unfold as we hope. When reality doesn't match our expectations, we suffer. But there's an ancient technique that allows you to maintain preferences and desires while eliminating the suffering that comes from unmet expectations. This technique is called wanting without attachment. It means you can have preferences, work toward goals, and care deeply about outcomes while maintaining inner peace regardless of what actually occurs. You can love people without needing them to love you back in specific ways. You can pursue success without being devastated by failure. You can hope for the best while being prepared for anything. The key insight is understanding the difference between preferences and demands. A preference is something you would like to happen but can accept not happening. A demand is something you believe must happen for you to be okay. Preferences create motivation without attachment. Demands create attachment without flexibility. Most people unconsciously turn their preferences into demands. They start by wanting something, then gradually convince themselves they need it, and finally believe they can't be happy without it. This transformation from want to need to demand creates enormous emotional vulnerability because you've made your happiness dependent on factors outside your control. Practice maintaining preferences as preferences. You can strongly prefer that people treat you with respect while accepting that some people won't. You can deeply desire success in your career while remaining emotionally stable if you face setbacks. You can hope for good health while maintaining equanimity if you encounter illness. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop working toward your goals. It means you put in maximum effort while maintaining emotional detachment from specific outcomes. You do everything within your power to create the results you want. Then accept whatever results actually occur. In relationships, this principle is especially powerful. You can love someone completely while being detached from how they express love in return. You can care deeply about someone's well-being without trying to control their choices. You can invest emotionally in relationships while maintaining your independence and self-sufficiency. This approach actually makes you more attractive and effective in relationships. People are drawn to those who love freely without keeping score. When you're not desperately attached to specific responses from others, you can be more authentic, generous, and present. You can give love as a gift rather than as an investment that requires specific returns. The practice begins with recognizing your current attachments and demands. What outcomes are you emotionally dependent on? What behaviors from others do you believe you need to be happy? What future scenarios are you anxious about because you've convinced yourself they must happen? Once you identify these attachments, practice mentally releasing them. Imagine the situations you're attached to not working out and finding peace anyway. Visualize people you love behaving differently than you prefer and maintaining your love for them without resentment. This mental rehearsal builds your capacity to handle actual disappointments with grace. Develop alternative sources of fulfillment that don't depend on external circumstances or other people's behavior. Instead of needing validation from others, learn to validate yourself based on your own values and efforts. Instead of requiring specific outcomes to feel successful, find satisfaction in the process of pursuing worthwhile goals. Remember that wanting without attachment is not emotional numbness or indifference. You still feel the full range of human emotions and care deeply about people and outcomes, but you don't make your emotional stability dependent on external factors aligning with your preferences. You remain centered and peaceful regardless of what happens around you. Chapter 12. Emergency Protocols. Rapid response techniques for acute emotional attacks. Even with strong emotional foundations, there will be moments when you face sudden intense emotional challenges that threaten to overwhelm your defenses. These might include unexpected betrayals, sudden losses, shocking news, or other acute stressors that trigger powerful emotional responses before you have time to apply your usual techniques. For these situations, you need emergency protocols, rapid response techniques that can quickly stabilize your emotional state and prevent you from being overwhelmed by intense feelings. These are your psychological first aid techniques for emotional emergencies. The most important emergency protocol is the pause and breathe technique. When you feel an intense emotional reaction beginning, immediately stop whatever you're doing and focus on your breathing. Take slow deep breaths for at least 60 seconds. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and prevents your emotional response from escalating out of control. During this breathing space, remind yourself of fundamental truths. This feeling is temporary. I can handle whatever is happening. My reaction is separate from the facts of the situation. I have tools to manage this. These reminders help engage your rational mind and provide perspective on the emotional intensity you're experiencing. The second emergency technique is zoom out thinking. When you're caught in emotional intensity, your perspective narrows and the current situation feels like the most important thing in the universe. Deliberately expand your perspective by asking, how will this matter in 5 years? What would I tell someone else facing this situation? What's the bigger picture here? Practice the fact versus story separation. In emotional emergencies, we often confuse what actually happened with the stories we're telling ourselves about what happened. Identify the bare facts of the situation separately from your interpretations. This helps you respond to reality rather than to your fears or assumptions about reality. Use physical movement to process emotional energy. Intense emotions create physical tension and energy that needs to be discharged. Take a walk, do jumping jacks, or engage in any physical activity that helps you metabolize the emotional intensity constructively rather than letting it build up in your system. Develop a personal mantra or phrase that you can repeat during emotional emergencies. This might be something like, "This too shall pass." "I am stronger than this feeling." Or "I choose peace over reactivity." Having a prepared phrase helps ground you when your thinking becomes unclear due to emotional intensity. Practice the 92 rule. Neuroscientist Jill Bolt Taylor discovered that intense emotions naturally cycle through your system in about 90 seconds if you don't re-trigger them with additional thoughts when you feel overwhelmed. Remind yourself that if you can avoid feeding the emotional reaction with dramatic thinking, it will naturally begin to subside within a minute and a half. Create a mental emergency kit of your most effective coping strategies. When you're emotionally overwhelmed, your ability to think clearly diminishes. Having a predetermined list of techniques prevents you from forgetting your tools when you need them most. This might include breathing exercises, perspective reminders, grounding techniques, or supportive people you can contact. The goal of these emergency protocols isn't to eliminate all emotional responses or pretend that difficult things don't affect you. The goal is to maintain enough emotional stability to respond consciously rather than react automatically. You want to feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Remember that emotional emergencies are temporary by nature. No feeling, no matter how intense, lasts forever unless you artificially sustain it through rumination and dramatic thinking. These techniques help you weather the initial storm so you can respond more thoughtfully once the intensity passes. Chapter 13. Relationship Mastery. How to connect deeply while remaining emotionally independent. The ultimate test of emotional mastery is maintaining your inner strength and peace while building deep, meaningful relationships with others. Most people believe they must choose between emotional independence and close connections. But this is a false choice. You can love deeply, connect authentically, and care genuinely, while remaining emotionally self-sufficient and unshakable. True relationship mastery begins with understanding that healthy relationships are created by two emotionally complete individuals choosing to share their lives, not by two incomplete people trying to find completion through each other. When you approach relationships from a position of emotional strength rather than emotional need, you create much healthier and more satisfying connections. The foundation of this approach is maintaining your own emotional center regardless of how others behave. You can be loving, supportive, and present without making your happiness dependent on receiving love, support, and attention in return. This doesn't mean you don't value these things. It means you don't need them to maintain your emotional stability. Practice loving without conditions or expectations. Most people love with an invisible scorecard, keeping track of what they give and what they receive. This creates transactions rather than relationships. When you love as a gift rather than an investment, you eliminate the resentment and disappointment that come from unmet expectations. Develop the ability to set boundaries without guilt or anger. Boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They're guidelines that preserve your emotional well-being and allow you to show up as your best self in relationships. You can say no to requests that don't align with your values or capabilities while maintaining love and respect for others. Learn to accept people exactly as they are rather than as potential projects for improvement. Most relationship problems come from trying to change others to match our preferences. When you accept people completely, you eliminate the frustration that comes from unmet expectations about who they should be. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment or remain in harmful relationships. It means you make relationship decisions based on who people actually are rather than who you hope they might become. You can love someone deeply while recognizing that they may not be compatible with your life goals or values. Practice emotional non-reactivity in challenging relationship moments when others are upset, angry, or difficult. Maintain your own emotional stability rather than getting pulled into their emotional state. You can be compassionate and supportive without absorbing their emotional turmoil. Communicate from clarity rather than emotion. When you need to address relationship issues, do so from a centered, rational state rather than from hurt, anger, or frustration. This leads to more productive conversations and better outcomes for everyone involved. Remember that you cannot control how others feel about you or treat you, but you can always control how you respond to their feelings and treatment. Focus your energy on being the kind of person you want to be in relationships rather than trying to control how others show up. Chapter 14. The Daily Practice. Installing emotional invulnerability as your default operating system. Knowledge without application is worthless. Understanding these principles intellectually won't change your life unless you integrate them into your daily experience through consistent practice. Emotional mastery is like physical fitness. It must be developed and maintained through regular training. Here's how to make emotional invulnerability your natural way of being. Start each day with a brief mental preparation ritual. Before engaging with external demands, spend 5 to 10 minutes reviewing your fundamental principles and setting intentions for how you want to respond to whatever the day brings. This mental preparation helps you approach challenges from strength rather than reactivity. Practice throughout the day by using small irritations as training opportunities. Traffic jams, long lines, rude people, and minor disappointments are perfect chances to practice maintaining your emotional center instead of viewing these situations as problems. See them as training exercises for your emotional fitness. Develop the habit of pausing before responding to any situation that triggers an emotional reaction. This brief pause allows you to engage your rational mind and choose your response rather than reacting automatically. Over time, this pause becomes natural and effortless. End each day with a brief review of your emotional responses and choices. What situations triggered strong reactions? How did you handle them? What did you learn? What would you do differently next time? This reflection helps you continuously improve your emotional skills. Create environmental supports for your practice. Surround yourself with reminders of your fundamental principles. This might include books, quotes are symbols that reinforce your commitment to emotional mastery. Design your environment to support your growth rather than enable old patterns. Build relationships with people who share your commitment to emotional maturity. Surround yourself with individuals who encourage your development rather than enable your limitations. Seek mentors who demonstrate the kind of emotional strength you want to develop. Be patient with yourself during the learning process. Emotional mastery is developed over months and years, not days and weeks. There will be setbacks and moments when you fall back into old patterns. These are normal parts of the learning process, not evidence that the principles don't work. Focus on progress rather than perfection. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional reactivity immediately. The goal is to gradually increase your capacity to choose your responses rather than being controlled by automatic reactions. Celebrate small improvements and maintain perspective on your overall development. Remember that consistency is more important than intensity. Daily practice of these principles, even in small ways, creates more lasting change than occasional intense efforts. Make emotional mastery a lifestyle rather than a temporary project. Chapter 15. Beyond Invulnerability. From protecting yourself to empowering others. As you master these principles and develop genuine emotional invulnerability, you'll discover something remarkable. Your goal shifts from protecting yourself from pain to helping others discover their own emotional freedom. When you're no longer vulnerable to being hurt by external circumstances, you naturally become a source of strength and stability for others. This transformation happens because emotional mastery creates abundance rather than scarcity. When you're emotionally self-sufficient, you have enormous reserves of peace, strength, and wisdom to share with others. You're no longer focused on protecting what little emotional stability you have. You're able to give freely from a place of genuine strength. People are naturally drawn to those who demonstrate real emotional mastery. They sense your groundedness and want to understand how you maintain such stability. Your example becomes more powerful than any advice you could give. You become living proof that emotional freedom is possible. Use your emotional strength to help others without trying to fix them or take responsibility for their emotional states. You can offer perspective, support, and encouragement while allowing others to learn their own lessons and develop their own strength. Your role is to be a steady presence, not to rescue people from their growth opportunities. Share these principles with others who are ready to hear them, but don't try to convince people who aren't interested in emotional mastery. Not everyone is ready for this level of personal responsibility. Focus your energy on those who are genuinely seeking to develop their own emotional strength. Remember that teaching these principles to others deepens your own understanding and commitment. When you help others develop emotional mastery, you reinforce your own practice and discover new applications of these ancient truths. The ultimate purpose of emotional invulnerability isn't to isolate yourself from the world or become indifferent to others' suffering. It's to become so emotionally strong and stable that you can engage more fully with life, love more freely, and contribute more meaningfully to others' well-being. When you've truly mastered the ancient trick to never get hurt again, you realize that the goal was never just to avoid pain. It was to become the kind of person who can handle anything life presents while maintaining your essential humanity, compassion, and commitment to growth. You discover that emotional invulnerability isn't armor that keeps you separate from life. It's the foundation that allows you to engage more deeply with life than ever before. You can take greater risks because you're not afraid of failure. You can love more deeply because you're not afraid of loss. You can pursue bigger dreams because you're not afraid of disappointment. This is the true promise of emotional mastery. Not a life without challenges or pain, but a life where challenges and pain can no longer diminish your essential strength, peace, and capacity for joy. You become like the ancient philosophers who inspired this journey. Unshakable in the face of adversity, generous in the face of scarcity, and peaceful in the face of chaos. The ancient trick to never get hurt again isn't really a trick at all. It's a profound understanding of human psychology combined with practical skills for managing your inner world. It's the recognition that while you cannot control what happens to you, you have complete control over what you make it mean. Master these principles. Practice them daily and you'll discover what the wisest humans throughout history have always known. That true strength comes from within. Real peace is independent of circumstances and genuine freedom is always available to those who understand the power of their own minds. The journey to emotional invulnerability ends where it began, with the recognition that the only person who can hurt you is yourself. And if you're the only one with that power, then you're also the only one who can take it away. Choose wisely, practice consistently, and you'll never be at the mercy of external circumstances again. Your emotional freedom begins